There's a particular kind of tired that doesn't live in the muscles. It lives somewhere behind the sternum, a pressure, dull and permanent like a bruise that forgot to heal. Sergeant Callum Drain knew that tired the way a fisherman knows weather, not from reading it, but from wearing it. He didn't know what month it was anymore. Not really. He knew he was on shift 41. That's how it worked now, in the part of his brain that still kept score. Not Tuesday, not November, not the 14th or the 22nd, or any number that belonged to a calendar a normal person might glance at over coffee. Shift 41. Survived. The morning shift 41 began. The fog was doing that thing it does in London when autumn hasn't fully committed to itself, hanging low over the mall, thin and gray, the kind that doesn't burn off so much as give up. It wasn't raining. It was something worse than rain. It was the threat of rain, perpetual, hovering, never delivering. Callum stood at the iron gates of Buckingham Palace and breathed. 1, 2, 3, 4. He'd learned that from a corporal 2 postings ago. Count the breaths. It gives the body something to report back on. The trick wasn't calm. He'd stopped chasing calm somewhere around shift 12. The trick was just having a task. Breathing was a task. Breathing you could complete. His uniform was immaculate. It always was. Not because he was meticulous by nature. His flat would have argued otherwise. 3 unwashed mugs on the counter, and a copy of a Cormac McCarthy novel face down, and broken spine on the floor. But because the uniform demanded it. The bearskin sat on his head with the gravity of something that had decided it was in charge. 50-some centimeters of dense black fur, curved just so. The chin strap pressed a familiar white line into his jaw. He'd measured that line once, on a bad night, with his thumbnail. He didn't do that anymore. The tourists came at 8:30. They always came at 8:30. There was a family, German, he thought, from the cadence of the vowels drifting over, with a boy of maybe 7 who had a Buckingham Palace keyring already, fresh from the gift shop, which meant they'd done their tourist homework before arriving, which Callum found oddly respectable. The boy pressed his nose against the gate railing and stared. Callum did not look at the boy. That was the job. You did not look at the boy. You did not blink at the camera flashes. You did not register the woman in the yellow raincoat who'd been standing 3 feet to his left for what felt like 11 minutes debating whether to take a selfie. She took the selfie. He did not blink. This was the mathematics of the post. You were present and absent simultaneously, a paradox in a scarlet tunic. The tourist needed you to be real enough to photograph, and not real enough to be comfortable in front of. A moving statue, a performing stone. The bearskin weighed 3 pounds. On shift 1, that had felt like nothing. On shift 41, it sat on his skull like a verdict. By 9 o'clock, the crowd had thickened. October had brought a school trip, a cluster of children in matching high-visibility yellow vests, bouncing like disturbed bees, a teacher at each end holding a clipboard as though clipboards could contain children. They could not. A boy with red hair broke from the cluster and put his hand flat against the gate, 2 inches from Callum's boot. Callum's eye moved. Just the eye. The boy yanked his hand back as if he'd touched something live. He looked at Callum with the exact expression of someone who'd expected furniture and found something else. Something that breathed. Yeah, Callum thought, in the specific interior voice he used for everything these days, low, dry, slightly too tired to be bitter. Still here. Shift 41, mate. The teacher appeared, clipboard first, apology following, the universal parental grimace of so sorry. He doesn't normally. Directed at a man who couldn't acknowledge it, which was its own comedy. The boy kept looking. Most children looked away when the guard didn't respond. This one kept looking, as if he was waiting for Callum to break some seal, cross some threshold, admit something. Children had this quality, sometimes this forensic patience. Callum breathed. 1, 2, 3. He was on hour 2 of a 4-hour stand. 2 more hours before the changeover, before he could walk the 63 steps back to the guardroom. He'd counted them once, delirious with cold, before he could sit down. He was not allowed to sit for 4 hours. His lower back had a specific opinion about that. What they don't tell you about ceremonial duty, what the recruitment brochures photograph straight past, is the texture of time when you're not allowed to move through it. Normal people move through time. They check their phone, shift their weight, scratch their nose, glance at a clock, refill a coffee cup. All those tiny interruptions stitched the hours into something navigable. You were here. Now you're there. Look, it's later. Callum had none of that. He had the fog. He had the iron gate. He had the sound of the crowd, which rose and fell in waves he'd learned to read the way you read tide. The low murmur of people arriving, the swell as someone famous was rumored nearby, the specific pitch of a child beginning to cry 3 minutes before it actually started. And he had his counting. Not time. Shifts. Shift 1 was the one where he believed in it fully. The uniform, the history, the weight of the institution pressing through the soles of his boots into the stone. He'd stood 6'2" in that bearskin and felt like something. The mall behind him, the palace at his back, the flag flying because someone of consequence was in residence. Shift 12 was the one where the tourist asked him to make a noise. Just a noise. Not words. Just, "Are you even real, mate? Just blink or something." And Callum had stared straight ahead at the middle distance and thought for the first time, I don't know. Shift 27. The one he didn't like thinking about. Shift 41. This one. Surviving it. The fog was lifting by 10, the way London fog does, grudgingly in patches like it was leaving something behind in the air that it didn't want to take back. The tourists multiplied. The school group had been corralled back into formation. The German family's boy had graduated from nose-on railing to holding up a toy soldier, plastic, red tunic, plastic bearskin, and comparing it to Callum at some length. The toy soldier was smiling. Callum was not smiling. Points to the toy, he thought. More emotionally available. It was not a fair comparison. Toy soldiers did not have lower backs. Toy soldiers did not count shifts. But he understood the impulse. To miniaturize something overwhelming. To put in your pocket where it fit. The incident began at 10:47. He knew the time because the clock on the Victoria Memorial was visible from his position at a certain angle, and he'd developed the habit of checking it without moving his head, a skill that had taken approximately shifts 4 through 6 to perfect. Not vanity, not torture, just data. Time remaining. Time elapsed. A number that wasn't a shift number, just to have both systems running. At 10:47, a man appeared at the far left of the gate section. Callum's eye moved. The man was perhaps 40, wearing a jacket that was too light for October, but in the way of someone who'd made a decision about October and was refusing to renegotiate. Dark hair, slightly overgrown. He wasn't photographing the palace. Wasn't photographing Callum. Wasn't looking at much of anything, really. He was standing very still. In a crowd of people in motion, repositioning, pointing, stepping back for better angles. A still person is an anomaly. It registers. Some evolutionary arithmetic, older than language. Callum breathed, kept his eyes forward, tracking the man in his peripheral, the way you track weather. The man's hands were at his sides, not in his pockets, just there, open. There was something about the posture. Not threatening. Not exactly. It was the posture of a person who had arrived somewhere after a very long journey and was not sure they'd arrive at the right place, but didn't have anywhere else to go. Shift 27 scratched at the edge of his memory. He pressed it down. Breathed. 1, 2. The man hadn't moved. This is the part they also don't tell you. How much of the job is this? Not the ceremonial, not the precision, but the watching. The sustained, unbroken attention that looks from the outside like vacancy, but is from the inside something closer to a finely calibrated instrument running quiet. Callum was watching. He was always watching. He was built for it now in a way that felt permanent, structural, like something had been rearranged in him to accommodate it. The man stood still for 6 minutes. 6 minutes is long. In crowd time, in tourist time, 6 minutes is the whole arc of arrival, photograph, departure for most people. 6 minutes, standing motionless at an iron gate, is a signal. Callum had learned to receive signals. A woman next to the man, his wife, maybe, or a stranger, stepped away to take a photograph, and in the small pocket of space that opened, Callum saw the man press one hand to the gate railing. Gently, not grabbing it, just touching it. The same way you touch something to check if it's real. The way you touch something because you need to feel that something is solid. Callum knew that touch. He'd done it himself, in a different context, a different country, a cold pre-dawn on a base outside Catterick with his palm flat against a stone wall, and this same question in his chest. Are you here? Are you actually here? The man looked up, not at Callum exactly, at the space Callum occupied. Their eyes didn't meet. That was protocol. Callum held his forward gaze. But something passed in the air between them. Less than a look, more than nothing. Some transmission, brief and wordless. The man pressed his lips together. Not at once. At no one. At the gate. At himself. Then he put his hands back at his sides and stood there in the crowd, very still, while the tourists moved around him like water around a fixed stone. Callum had not moved. He would not move. His eyes were forward. The bearskin was level. The chin strap pressed its white line into his jaw. But something in his chest, that bruised place, the permanent pressure, shifted. Not healed. Not named. Just shifted. Shift 41, he thought. Still here. The guardroom smelled like boots and instant coffee and the particular brand of silence that collects in rooms where men are not permitted to say what they mean. Callum sat on the wooden bench and pressed his palms flat against his knees and stared at the floor. The stone floor was cold in the way of things that had been cold for centuries and had stopped pretending otherwise. Someone had left a copy of The Sun folded in thirds on the shelf above the hooks. The headline was about a footballer. Callum didn't read it. He had 17 minutes. Not enough to sleep. Not enough to genuinely rest. Enough to put the bearskin on its stand and let his neck remember what it weighed without bearing it. He rolled his head left, right. Something in his cervical spine said something impolite. Private Lena Marsh came through the door with 2 cups of coffee, one of which she extended to him with the precision of someone performing a ritual, which she was. This was the ritual. Coffee, bench, 17 minutes, not talking about anything that mattered. He took the cup. How's the crowd? She said. Standard. Anyone try the rope thing? Not yet. Early. Give it till noon. The rope thing was what they called the recurring tourist maneuver of stretching a camera strap, selfie stick, or extendable arm to just inside the gate perimeter in the hope of triggering some reaction. It never worked. But they kept trying, which Callum had concluded was either optimism or a failure of institutional memory on the part of the global tourist population. He drank the coffee. It was bad. It was always bad. That was also part of the ritual. You've got 41 today? Marsh said, not looking at him. Yeah. She said nothing for a moment. Callum watched the steam from his cup. That a lot of shifts, she said, finally, in the particular register she used when she was saying something real in the shape of something casual. It's a number. Sure. He drank. She drank. The footballer watched them from the folded newspaper. Callum had been at the palace for 9 months. He'd requested the posting. That was the part people found surprising when they found out, the requested part. Because from the outside, from the civilian side of things, ceremonial duty looked like a reward or a punishment, depending on your assumptions about standing still. He'd requested it because of Shift 0. Shift 0 was the name he gave to the period before the counting started. 6 weeks at his flat in Woolwich, after he'd come back, after the medical discharge had been processed, and the paperwork had been signed, and the Army had thanked him in the language Armies use, which is formal and complete and leaves nothing out and says nothing. 6 weeks in that flat. He'd stopped shaving on day 4. Stopped eating real meals on day 9. Started counting the ceiling tiles. There were 42 in the living room. He was confident of this. Sometime around day 20. Became intimate with the particular 3 a.m. pitch of the city outside his window. A frequency no one talks about because no one else is listening at 3 a.m. His mom had called twice. He'd answered both times and said he was fine in a voice that almost convinced him. He hadn't been fine. He'd known the word for what he was. He'd sat in enough briefings, read enough pamphlets, filled out enough wellness surveys to know the clinical name for the thing in his chest and the ceiling tile counting and the 3 a.m. vigils. Knowing the name hadn't helped. What had helped, what had genuinely structurally helped, was the application form for ceremonial duty. Filling it out, putting a future event in a future box, drawing a line from here to there. Post begins, a date. Duration, a duration. Structure, schedule, the body having somewhere to be. He was not naive about it. He knew the therapy was ongoing and necessary, and that standing in a bearskin was not a cure. He knew the man in him who counted ceiling tiles was still in the flat, would be in the flat for a long time. But he also knew that somewhere between shift 1 and shift 41, the ratio had shifted. More hours surviving a knot. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Marsh set down her cup. There was a man, Callum said, at the gate. Around 10:47. Marsh waited, just standing, not photographing, not doing the tourist thing, just standing with his hand on the railing. You report it? No threat. It wasn't that. Callum turned the empty cup in his hands. He just looked like he needed the gate to be solid. Marsh was quiet for a beat that knew what it was. You flag it with the duty officer? No. Another beat. Right, she said. Not judgment. Not approval. Just acknowledgement of the specific category of thing that doesn't go in a report. He nodded, Callum said, before he left. Just once. At nothing. Maybe at you. I was looking forward. You were. The word landed at an angle that meant, but that doesn't mean he wasn't nodding at you. Callum put the cup down. 17 minutes were nearly gone. He stood. The bearskin waited on its stand with the patience of something accustomed to being picked back up. The chin strap pressed into his jaw. 1, 2, 3. Marsh held the door. He walked back out into the October light, which had made up its mind about itself in his absence, gone from ambiguous to clear and cold, the sky doing what London skies do when they're actually trying, that specific shade of blue that belongs to northern places and short afternoons. The crowd had reorganized itself in his absence the way crowds do, new configurations, new faces, the permanent slight left lean of people trying to get a better angle at something they've already photographed from the right. He took his position. The gate, the stone, the mall stretching away behind the Victoria Memorial, tree-lined and straight as purpose. He breathed. The man with the too light jacket was gone. Of course he was gone. People came and went. That was the population of this particular coordinate, always rotating, always new faces carrying the same expressions. Wonder, boredom, the particular tourist calculation of, is this actually impressive, or have I been told it's impressive? But Callum looked at the place where the man had stood. Something about the nod. He'd been nodded at before. Tourists nodded. It was a kind of acknowledgement, a way of saying, I know you can't respond, but I want you to know I see you're a person. He'd learned to categorize those nods. Friendly nod. Cheeky nod. The nod of someone who wanted to seem respectful so they could justify the selfie they were about to take. This had been different. This had been the nod of one person who was surviving something at another person who was surviving something else, passing in different corridors of the same building. I see you. I'm here too. Shifts, not days. Callum had not nodded back. Protocol was protocol, but he'd received it. In the bruised place behind his sternum. He'd received it. The afternoon built itself out slowly. A couple, Americans, the sneakers were a giveaway, and he'd stopped feeling like a cliché for noticing. Spent a full 20 minutes trying to get their toddler to face the camera while the toddler maintained an absolute commitment to facing away from it. Callum watched this, without moving, without expression, with the interior running commentary he developed sometime around shift 15. The toddler is winning. The toddler always wins. The toddler does not care about the composition. The toddler has the correct philosophy. A group of Italian students arrived, loud in the comfortable way of people who decided volume was a form of affection for a city. One girl was crying, not distress crying, laughing crying, the kind that's almost indistinguishable from the other kind if you only have audio. Her friend was telling a story with her whole body, reenacting something, and the crying girl had given up trying to hold it together. The laughter reached Callum's position. He did not smile. He thought about smiling. He noted the thought. That was as far as he'd take it. By 2 in the afternoon, the crowd had that particular post-lunch texture. Thinner, slower, the energy of people who'd already done the thing and were now in the pleasant aftermath of it. A few dedicated ones still pressed against the railings. A photographer with a serious camera, not a tourist, press credentials, probably, set up 40 feet back and worked the angles. Callum was used to being photographed. He was used to existing in other people's records of a day that, for him, was a shift. They would go home and show the photograph and say we saw the palace, and the photograph would sit in an album or a phone and occasionally be scrolled past, and the person would say to themselves or someone else, remember London, and there would be a version of Callum, frozen, bearskin level, chin strap exacting in that photograph. He thought about this a lot early on. Now he thought about it differently. He was the fixed point, the thing that stayed while everything rotated around it. The crowd came and went. The days blurred into shifts survived. The fog came and lifted. The tourists arrived with their keyrings and their cameras and their children who wanted to see if he was real. He was the anchor. And maybe he started thinking this around shift 30. Maybe that was enough to be the thing that stays, to be solid. At 3:17, a sound to his left. Not unusual. Sounds happened. But this sound had a particular register, a cry brief, cut short, the kind that followed something going wrong. Callum's peripheral vision caught the motion. A woman, older, maybe 70s. She'd been walking behind the small crowd near the adjacent section of gate and had gone down. Not dramatically, not in any cinematic way. Just her hip gave or her foot caught something and the ground came up. People turned. The reflex of a crowd encountering injury. A beat of stillness, then the surge forward. The woman was on one knee, not all the way down, trying to get back up with the particular dignity of someone who was mortified by the fall, not the pain. Two tourists crouched to her. Good. Helping. Callum had not moved. Protocol was specific. His post was his post. Unless there was a direct threat, a direct order, a direct necessity, the post was the post. The woman was helped to her feet by the two tourists and a third who'd materialized from somewhere. She was embarrassed. Callum could see it from here, her hand coming up to her hair in the automatic gesture of someone reassembling themselves in public. She was fine. She was fine. His hands, inside their white gloves, were completely still. He breathed. This was shift 41. 42 would come. He would be there for it. The last hour of shift is its own country. Not easier than the first. Not harder, exactly. Different. The body has accepted its assignment by now. The aching back is just a fact. The cold that has worked through the tunic is just a climate. The weight of the bearskin is just the weight of the bearskin. Acceptance isn't comfort, but it's workable. What changes in the last hour is the quality of attention. The first hour, you're vigilant in the obvious way, scanning, tracking, alert to disruption. The last hour, something quieter takes over. Call it endurance attention. You see more, not less. The crowd resolves into individuals. Details surface. The man with the shopping bag from Pret that's been sitting at his feet for 40 minutes, untouched. The child who stopped crying 20 minutes ago and is now asleep against her mother's shoulder with her mouth open. The older couple who've been standing side by side, not talking, not photographing, not doing anything that could be explained, just standing there together, looking at the gate. Callum noticed the couple around 4 o'clock. He had 1 hour left. The couple were perhaps late 60s. The man had the particular kind of bearing that comes from decades of good posture, enforced by something external, military, or boarding school, or both. Straight back, hands clasped behind him, chin slightly elevated. Not imitating Callum's stance, but accidentally rhyming it. The woman wore a green coat, the particular saturated green that costs money without advertising it. Her hair was silver. Her hand was in the crook of the man's arm. Not holding on, just resting there, the way a hand rests somewhere it's always rested. They were looking at the flag. The flag was flying, the royal standard, which meant someone was in residence. They'd been watching it for a while. Not the gate. Not Callum. The flag. People looked at the flag sometimes. Not often. Most people's eyes went to the building, the gates, the guards. The flag was background, scenery. These two were watching it the way people watch something that's meant something to them for a long time. Callum had a rule about speculation. The rule was don't. He'd made it on shift 7, after spending an entire 4-hour stand weaving an elaborate internal narrative about a woman who'd stood at the gate for 2 hours, which he later partially confirmed was either a private drama or waiting for a friend with bad directions. And Either way had nothing to do with anything he'd constructed. The rule after Shift 7 was observe without story, data without interpretation. He was breaking the rule now. He was watching the couple, and he was thinking about their lives. Not inventing details, he was careful about that. Had been careful about inventing things since well before Shift 1, but observing the grammar of them. The way her head inclined slightly toward his shoulder without touching it. The way he adjusted his hands behind his back, reclaiming them briefly, then returned to standing beside her. Small negotiations. Long practiced. They'd been together a long time. That was not speculation. That was grammar. At 4:15, the man turned and looked directly at Callum. Not the slide and glance of the photographing tourists. Not the studied non-look of people pretending they're not looking. He turned and looked with the same quality of attention with which he'd been watching the flag. Steady, open, unperformative. Callum held his forward gaze. The man reached into his coat pocket and took out something small. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Callum again. Deliberate, like he was checking something against something else. He crossed to the gate. Callum tracked him peripherally. The man stopped in front of him, appropriately, not close enough to be a problem, the width of the gate section between them, and held the thing out. Not through the gate. Not inside the perimeter. Just held it at his side, the way you hold something you want someone to see without making them take it. It was a photograph. Small, palm-sized, the slightly faded quality of something printed years ago rather than last week. A guard, in this uniform, in this position. Different face. Same gait. Same bearskin. Callum did not look at it. He was looking forward. But he saw it. The man said something too quietly for the crowd to catch, but not too quietly for Callum to catch. He said, "My son, 1993. Then he put the photograph back in his pocket and walked back to his wife, who was still watching the flag. Callum breathed. 1, 2, 3. The bruised place. The pressure. He held it perfectly still in there because he had 56 minutes left, and perfect stillness was the job. 1993. 33 years. The man's son had stood at this gate 33 years ago, in this uniform, in this specific shape, and now the man was standing where tourists stood, looking through the same iron bars from the other side, carrying a photograph in his pocket. There were versions of this he didn't want to think about. The version where the son was alive, and the photograph was a proud relic. The version where the son was alive, and they'd lost touch in the way families lose touch when men come back from things and stop knowing how to be inside of rooms. The version where the son was not alive. He didn't know which version. He was not going to know, but the man had crossed the tourist divide and held out a photograph in silence and said 2 words and walked back. My son, 1993, which meant, I know what this is, which meant, I have stood on both sides of this gate, which meant something Callum didn't have a sentence for yet, something that sat in the bruised place and didn't hurt the way things in the bruised place usually hurt. He thought about Shift 27. He'd never called it a shift to anyone. To everyone else, his commanding officer, the duty officer, the welfare officer who'd come afterwards, it had been an incident with a date attached. A day, a calendar event. But in his own accounting, it was Shift 27. The shift where the fog had been extraordinary, the proper February kind, dense enough to obscure the Victoria Memorial and make the mall disappear into white. He'd been at his post 7 minutes in when something behind his eyes had gone very quiet in a way that wasn't calm. He'd learned, since, the clinical name for that particular quiet. The literature described it. He'd read the literature. He found it more useful to read than not to read, though the reading didn't make it less real when it arrived. On Shift 27, in that white fog, something that lived in him from Catterick had surfaced without announcement, and Callum had stood at the gate of Buckingham Palace and breathed 1, 2, 3, 4, and had not moved, had not broken, had not done anything that couldn't appear in the duty log. He had survived Shift 27 by the narrowest kind of surviving, the kind you don't boast about, the kind you acknowledge quietly, privately, in the back of an internal ledger you don't show anyone. Shift 28 had come. He'd been there for it. 29, 30, All the way to this one, cold October, the flag flying, the old man's photograph in his pocket, the last 40 minutes of shift 41 assembling themselves out of the available seconds. The couple left at 4:30. Not dramatically. The woman said something to the man. He nodded, and they walked together back toward the mall, slowly, the way people walk who aren't in a hurry and have decided not to be. She kept her hand in the crook of his arm. Callum watched them go. The crowd had thinned with the advancing afternoon. November was a week away. The light was already doing the London thing of withdrawing slightly earlier than it should, the blue going deeper, the shadows longer, the quality of the air shifting from cold in October to cold that means. He had 38 minutes. He ran through his inventory. Bearskin, level. Chin strap, exacting. Back, noted but not catastrophic. Hands inside white gloves, still. Deliberately, absolutely still. Breathing, 1, 2, 3, 4. The interior ledger, the one no one saw. 42 will be Tuesday. 43 is Thursday's late. 44 is next week. He didn't know what month. He'd stopped knowing what month around shift 18 and had found, to his ongoing mild surprise, that it didn't matter. Not in a detached or dissociated way. In the way that the present month becomes less important when you're living inside the finer increment of it. A shift was a day compressed and expanded simultaneously. Compressed because it had clear edges, a beginning and an end you could count toward. Expanded because each one had its own complete interior world. The man with the too light jacket. The couple with the flag. The boy from the school trip who'd yanked his hand back from the gate railing with the expression of discovering furniture had opinions. All of it. This shift. 41. He was going to survive it. He already had nearly 20 minutes left. The crowd is sparse now. A few determined tourists, collars up against the sharpening cold. A man selling flags on the far side of the memorial had packed half his stock and was negotiating with the remaining flags about whether it was worth staying. The flags were non-committal. Callum had a clear sight line down the mall. The trees were nearly bare. Their branches crossed over the road in the lattice of things that had let go of what they didn't need. The evening was coming, gathering itself at the edges of the day, and the lamppost along the mall had come on already. London's preemptive gesture against the dark, the orange light beginning to show against the still blue sky. He thought about Marsh and her coffee, which would be waiting in the guardroom in some form that was less coffee than ambition. He thought about the 63 steps. He thought about the McCarthy novel on his floor, face down, broken-spined, chapter 12 still waiting for him since shift 38. He was going to read it tonight. He was going to drink something better than guardroom coffee. He bought a bag of decent Ethiopian stuff from a shop on the Vauxhall Bridge Road that sat in his kitchen and cost more than he normally justified and tasted like the category of thing worth surviving toward. Not a plan. A thing that existed in the near future, close enough to reach. 10 minutes. Private Osei was coming to relieve him. He could see him in peripheral vision, making the approach from the guardroom. The precise, measured pace of a man performing the changeover, which was itself a ceremony, which was itself a small ritual inside the larger one. Callum straightened. He was already straight, but there's a straightening that happens in the last minutes that's different from the structural. It's the straightening of something interior, the conscious gathering of whatever you are into the shape the job requires for its conclusion. He breathed. 1, 2, 3, 4. The mall. The flag, still flying. The lampposts. The sky. Osei arrived at the handover position. The changeover happened with the formal precision of a mechanism built to last forever. The specific sequence of movements, the silent choreography, the baton passing without a word between them because it had never needed words. Then Callum stepped back. One step, then another. Then he was behind the gate, inside the perimeter, and Osei was forward and the position was filled and shift 41 was done. He stood there for a moment, not because protocol required it, just because he was standing there. The mall stretched away in front of him, the lampposts doing their early evening work, the trees their November mathematics, the city arranging itself for the long dark that was coming. He had survived 41 shifts. He would survive 42. The man with the photograph in his pocket had stood on this pavement, 33 years ago, in this weight, in this cold, and had survived his shifts. And then 33 years had folded themselves up, and here was his father carrying the evidence in a coat pocket, watching the flag. Something that endures, Callum thought. Not heroically, not with any of the language used in the recruitment materials. Just something that keeps standing when the standing is hard. He did the 63 steps. The guardroom door. The bench. The bearskin lifted off, placed on its stand with both hands, the way you set something down that deserves to be set down carefully. His neck remembered what it weighed without bearing it. He breathed. 1, 2. That was enough. He picked up the coat he'd left on the hook. He went home. That night, he made the Ethiopian coffee. He sat at his kitchen table. The mugs were washed now. Had been for a while. That was a Shift 29 thing, with the McCarthy novel in front of him and the coffee, which was better than guardroom coffee the way weather is better than a photograph of weather. He opened to chapter 12. He read for a while. He didn't count the ceiling tiles. He didn't count anything. Tomorrow, Shift 42. Tonight, just this. A table. A mug. A story that had been waiting for him. Patient as gates, patient as stone. He turned the page. They don't give medals for shift survived. They don't give medals for the particular mathematics of getting up one more time. But somewhere in London, in a flat above a chip shop on a road that doesn't appear in any guidebook, a man was reading a novel and drinking good coffee, and the night was doing nothing more alarming than being night. That was the whole of it. That was all of it. That was enough.